Clara sat by the window of the train, staring out at the passing landscape. She had always dreamed of something bigger, something more than the quiet life in the little town where she grew up. Her heart was filled with hope, and the excitement in her chest made it hard to sit still. This was it, the new beginning she had been waiting for. Clara was a petite woman, not much taller than 5 feet, with delicate features that often made her seem fragile to others. But beneath her small frame, she carried a big heart and dreams that stretched beyond the horizon. For as long as she could remember, Clara had wished for a better life. Her family was kind, but they didn't have much. Every day felt the same, working on their small farm, taking care of the animals, and watching the seasons pass by without much change. Clara knew that there was more out there in the world, beyond the green hills and the dusty roads. She had read stories of women who had found adventure and love in distant places, and so, after many nights of thinking, she made a bold decision. She would become a mail-order bride. The idea of a fresh start, of finding someone who could love her, made Clara feel both nervous and excited. She had written letters to several men, and after much waiting, she received a reply from a man named Tom. He lived out west, where the land was wild and untamed. Tom's letter spoke of a hard-working man who needed a wife to help him on his farm. He mentioned the wide-open spaces and the promise of a simple but fulfilling life. It sounded perfect. It sounded like everything Clara had ever dreamed of. With her bags packed and her heart full of hope, Clara boarded the train that would take her to the west. As the wheels turned and the landscape changed, Clara felt her excitement grow. She imagined what her new life would be like, working side by side with Tom, building a home and living a life filled with love and hard work. She could already picture the small house they would have, surrounded by fields of green and the endless sky above. The journey felt long, but it was nothing compared to the happiness she imagined waiting for her at the end. She often closed her eyes and dreamed of meeting Tom. She pictured him as strong, dependable and kind, someone who would appreciate her for who she was, small but full of love. When the train finally arrived at the small town where Tom lived, Clara's heart raced with anticipation. The town was dusty and quiet, nestled between the mountains. The air felt fresh, and the sun shone brightly in the clear sky. As she stepped off the train, Clara looked around, taking in the new surroundings. She clutched her small suitcase and adjusted the wide-brimmed hat that shielded her face from the sun. Tom had written to tell her that he would meet her at the station, and Clara felt a mix of nervousness and excitement as she searched the crowd for him. She finally saw a man standing near the platform, tall and broad-shouldered, with rough hands that seemed to tell the story of hard work. His face was set in a serious expression, and Clara felt a flutter of nerves in her stomach. She hoped he would be pleased to meet her. As Clara approached, Tom didn't smile. He looked her up and down, his eyes lingering on her small frame for a moment. She tried to read his expression, but it was hard to tell what he was thinking. When he spoke, his voice was rough, like the sound of gravel underfoot. "Well," he said, his words not as warm as Clara had imagined. "I didn't expect you to be so small." Clara felt a wave of disappointment wash over her. She had expected Tom to be kind, to be happy to see her, but instead, there was something in his voice that made her feel as if she had disappointed him already. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, trying to keep the hurt out of her voice. "I'm just a little smaller than you probably imagined." Tom didn't say anything at first. He simply nodded and motioned for Clara to follow him. As they walked, Clara tried to make small talk, asking about the town and the farm, but Tom's answers were short and to the point. His eyes seemed distant, and Clara began to feel more and more out of place. She had traveled so far, and yet she was beginning to wonder if she had made a mistake. When they arrived at Tom's farm, Clara could see the land stretching out before her, fields that seemed to go on forever, and a house that was small and simple. It was nothing like the dream she had imagined. She had expected warmth, a sense of belonging, but instead there was an emptiness in the air. Tom barely looked at her as he showed her around. Later, after a quiet dinner, Tom said something that took Clara by surprise. "I don't know if you'll be able to handle this life," he said. "The work here is hard, and I need someone who can keep up. You're too small for all of it." Clara's heart sank. She had never felt so rejected in her life. She had come all this way, ready to start a new chapter, but now it seemed as if Tom wasn't interested in giving her a chance. She tried to hold back the tears, but they came anyway, slipping down her cheeks. She wiped them away quickly, not wanting to seem weak in front of him. Tom, on the other hand, didn't seem to notice or care. He simply turned away, as if his words hadn't affected her at all. Clara stayed in the small room Tom had given her, feeling completely alone. She had hoped for a warm welcome, a new beginning, but instead she felt as though she had been discarded. She had been rejected, not because of her character, but because of something she couldn't change, her size. The night was long. Clara lay in bed staring at the ceiling, unsure of what to do. She had traveled so far, and yet now she felt like an outsider in a place that was supposed to be her new home. She knew she couldn't stay in this situation. But what choice did she have? She couldn't go back home. She had no money, no means of support. She had put all her hopes into this new life, only to find that it wasn't what she had imagined. As the days passed, Tom's behavior didn't change. He continued to treat her as though she were a burden. There were no kind words, no gestures of warmth. Clara spent her days helping with small tasks, but she knew she wasn't wanted. She had come to realize that her dreams of a happy life with Tom were not going to come true. One afternoon, after yet another silent meal, Clara made a decision. She couldn't stay here any longer. She had to leave. But where would she go? What would she do? The future seemed uncertain, and Clara felt a deep sense of despair. The life she had imagined was slipping away, and she didn't know how to hold on to it. But even in her darkest moments, Clara couldn't help but think that there was still a chance for something better, something she hadn't yet discovered. She just didn't know where to find it. Clara stood outside the small farmhouse, her heart heavy with the weight of disappointment. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm glow over the fields, but the beauty of the evening couldn't ease the feeling of rejection that had settled in her chest. She had been hoping for a fresh start, a life filled with love and opportunity, but instead she felt more alone than ever. As she walked around the farm, doing her best to stay busy, she couldn't help but think about the life she had imagined. Tom had promised her a future together, but now she realized that it wasn't going to happen. His cold words echoed in her mind. "You're too small for this life." The more she thought about it, the more it hurt. How could he judge her so quickly? Clara wasn't a stranger to hard work. She had grown up on a farm, helping her family with chores, and she was strong in her own way. But Tom hadn't even given her a chance. For the next few days, Clara kept herself occupied with cleaning, cooking, and doing the little tasks that were expected of her. She did her best to make herself useful, but Tom barely acknowledged her efforts. He worked the fields, and when he wasn't busy, he would retreat into his own world, never speaking much to her. There was no warmth, no conversation, only the silence that grew between them like a thick wall. The town around them was quiet, and there didn't seem to be anyone she could turn to. One afternoon, as Clara was walking through the town square, she noticed a figure standing by the edge of the road. At first, she thought it might be someone else from the farm, but as she got closer, she realized it was a man she hadn't seen before. He was tall, so tall, in fact, that Clara had to crane her neck to look up at him. His face was rugged, with a thick beard and a pair of deep, kind eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. He wore worn leather boots, a cowboy hat, and a shirt that looked like it had seen years of use. He was standing next to a large wagon filled with supplies and looked like he had just returned from a long journey. Clara hesitated for a moment. She had been so focused on her own troubles that she hadn't even noticed the man before. He didn't seem like the other men she had encountered in town. His presence felt different, somehow comforting. Without realizing it, she found herself walking towards him. The man turned as she approached, and his face broke into a warm smile, something Clara hadn't seen in a while. "Hello there," he said in a deep, friendly voice. "I don't believe we've met. My name's Hank." Clara smiled back, though her heart still felt heavy. "I'm Clara," she said softly, wondering why she had decided to speak to this stranger. She didn't normally feel so open to talking, but something about Hank made her feel at ease. "I can tell you're new around here," Hank continued, his voice carrying a hint of curiosity. "What brings you to town?" Clara hesitated, unsure of how much to share. She didn't want to burden him with her story, but at the same time, There was something about Hank that made her feel like she could trust him. "I came to marry a man," she said slowly, "but things didn't turn out as I had hoped." Hank raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued but not pressing her for more details. "I see," he said, his voice softening. "Well, you've come to the right place. This town may be small, but the people here look out for one another." Clara felt a little relief in his words, even though her situation hadn't changed. She gave him a weak smile. "I don't know what to do now. I've come all this way, and now I'm not sure where to go." Hank looked at her for a moment, his eyes thoughtful. "If you're looking for a place to stay, I've got a cabin a few miles out of town. It's not much, but it's quiet, and I could always use some help around the place. I've been on the road a lot lately, so I haven't had much time to fix things up." Clara felt a sense of gratitude toward him. He didn't even know her, and yet here he was, offering her a place to stay. She had never expected such kindness from a stranger, especially not in this small town where people seemed so focused on their own lives. "That's very kind of you," Clara said, "but I don't want to impose." Hank shook his head. "It's no imposition. I've got plenty of space, and if you're willing to help, I'd be happy for the company. Besides, I don't like seeing folks struggle alone." Clara thought about it for a moment. She had nowhere else to go, and Hank seemed like a man of his word. Maybe this was the fresh start she needed, even if it wasn't the one she had planned. After all, she couldn't stay with Tom any longer. She needed to take control of her own fate. "I'll take you up on your offer," Clara said, feeling a spark of hope that had been missing since she arrived. "Thank you, Hank." With that, Hank offered her a ride to his cabin, and they left the town behind. The ride was peaceful. The sound of the horses' hooves against the ground was the only noise breaking the silence between them. As they made their way through the rolling hills and wide open fields, Clara noticed how different Hank seemed from the man she had been with before. He wasn't as quick to judge, and there was a gentleness in his demeanor that Clara hadn't expected. When they arrived at the cabin, Clara was surprised by how simple and cozy it felt. It wasn't grand by any means, but it had a charm to it. The wooden walls were weathered, but they told a story of a life lived with care. There was a small porch with a few chairs, and the air smelled fresh and clean. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden light over everything. "This is it," Hank said, dismounting from the wagon and helping Clara down. "It's not much, but it's home." Clara looked around, taking in the peaceful surroundings. For the first time since her arrival in the West, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. Maybe things hadn't gone according to plan, but perhaps this was where she was meant to be. Over the next few days, Hank worked on the cabin, fixing the roof and chopping wood. Clara helped where she could, fetching water and cooking meals for them both. It wasn't much, but she felt useful. More than that, she felt respected. Hank never once made her feel small or weak, and every time she asked if she could help, he always found something for her to do. One evening, as the two of them sat on the porch, watching the stars begin to appear in the sky, Hank turned to her. "You know," he said softly, "you're stronger than you look." Clara smiled, not sure if he was just being kind or if he truly believed it. "I've had to be strong," she said quietly, "but sometimes it's hard to remember that." Hank nodded, understanding more than Clara expected. "You don't have to be strong all the time, Clara. Not here anyway. You've got a place with me now. You don't have to worry about being too small or too weak." His words meant more to her than she could say. For the first time in a long time, Clara felt like she mattered. Hank hadn't judged her for being small. He hadn't asked her to be someone she wasn't. He had simply offered her kindness, something she had not found in Tom or anyone else since arriving. And in that moment, Clara realized that maybe, just maybe, this was the new beginning she had been searching for all along. As the days turned into weeks, Clara began to settle into life at Hank's cabin. At first she had been unsure of what to expect, but the more she worked alongside Hank, the more comfortable she became in the quiet rhythm of country life. The mornings were peaceful, with the soft sound of birds singing as the sun rose over the hills. Clara would get up early, make a simple breakfast, and then help Hank with whatever needed to be done around the cabin. There was always something that needed fixing, whether it was chopping wood for the fire or patching up small leaks in the roof. Hank had been busy on the road for so long that there were plenty of tasks waiting for him. Clara was eager to help, and Hank was always willing to show her how to do things. Though she had never been as strong as him, Clara found that she could contribute in her own way. She wasn't as big or as physically strong, but her hands were nimble and her mind was quick. She learned how to clean and prepare the tools, gather firewood, and make the cabin as cozy as it could be. The work wasn't easy, but it was fulfilling. Every task, no matter how small, felt like a victory. At first, Clara had been unsure of herself. Her small size had always made her feel like she was less capable than others. She had grown up being told that she needed to be more, to do more, and to be stronger. But Hank never made her feel that way. He never mentioned her size or made her feel as if she couldn't do something. He simply showed her what needed to be done and trusted her to try. One afternoon, Hank was busy repairing the cabin's roof, and Clara was chopping wood for the fire. She had never really had to chop wood before, but she had watched Hank do it many times. She knew the basic technique, but it still felt like a lot of work. With each swing of the axe, Clara felt the strain in her arms and legs. The task was harder than she expected, and the muscles in her arms began to ache. But she didn't stop. She remembered how Hank had told her that she was stronger than she looked, and she wanted to prove it to herself. After what felt like an hour, Clara finally set the axe down, breathing heavily. The pile of chopped wood was smaller than she had hoped, but it was a start. She wiped her forehead, feeling a sense of accomplishment even if she hadn't completed everything she wanted to. As she picked up another piece of wood, Hank came over to her, wiping the sweat from his brow. "You did good," he said with a smile. "That's more than I expected." Clara smiled, a little embarrassed but grateful for his words. "It's not much, but I'll keep at it." Hank nodded, his deep voice gentle. "You've got the heart for it, Clara. That's what counts." That night, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Clara felt a sense of peace she hadn't known before. The fire crackled, sending warmth into the cool evening air, and the stars outside shone brightly like a million tiny diamonds scattered across the sky. The cabin felt like a home, not just a place to stay. It felt like a place where she was seen and appreciated. For the first time in a long while, Clara didn't feel like she had to be someone else or prove herself to anyone. She could just be herself. Hank, sitting across from her with a cup of coffee in his hand, seemed to notice the change in her too. "You're looking more at ease these days," he said, his voice thoughtful. Clara glanced up at him. "I feel at ease. It's just, I didn't realize how much I needed a change. When I first got here, everything felt so wrong. I thought I had to be more, do more to fit in. But out here, it's different. I don't have to be someone I'm not." Hank smiled, his eyes softening. "You don't have to be anything but yourself, Clara. You're doing just fine as you are. That's the truth." Clara nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for Hank's understanding. His words made her feel more secure in who she was. She had always felt small, both in size and in the way people saw her. But here, with Hank, she didn't feel like her size mattered. She felt strong in her own way. The next few weeks brought more changes. Clara became more comfortable in her role at the cabin. She started to take on bigger tasks, even things that once seemed impossible to her. She helped Hank with building a new fence for the pasture, something she never would have dreamed of doing back when she had lived in the East. With Hank's guidance, she learned how to handle tools, how to measure the posts, and how to make sure the fence would be sturdy enough to hold the livestock. Hank's patience with her never wavered. He would show her the right way to do things step by step, never rushing her or making her feel incompetent. And Clara found that with each task she grew a little more confident in herself. She had always been told she was too small, too delicate to do hard work. But Hank had shown her that strength came in all shapes and sizes. She might not have the raw power he did, but she had her own brand of strength, one that came from determination and a willingness to learn. One evening, as they were sitting on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Hank turned to her. "You've come a long way since you first got here," he said, his voice quiet but proud. Clara looked at him, surprised. "I didn't think I'd get this far. When I first arrived, I was lost. I didn't know if I could handle it." "You've handled more than you know," Hank replied. "You've done more than most people would. You've worked hard and you've kept your head up through it all." Clara smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you. You've shown me how much I can do, even when I didn't believe in myself." Hank's expression softened, and for a moment Clara saw something in his eyes that she couldn't quite place. It was a warmth, a tenderness that made her feel more connected to him than ever. The quiet moments between them had become more frequent, and Clara found herself enjoying his company more and more. She began to notice little things about him, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the way his deep voice made her feel safe. There was something special about Hank that she couldn't deny. The bond between them had deepened in a way Clara hadn't expected. They weren't just two people working together. They were starting to care about each other in ways that went beyond friendship. For the first time in a long time, Clara felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. Hank had given her the space to be herself, and in return, she had found a strength within her that she never knew existed. They had built something together, more than just a cabin or a fence, but a connection that felt like it could last forever. As Clara looked out at the stars that night, she realized that maybe her journey wasn't about finding someone to love her for her size or her strength. It was about discovering who she truly was and finding someone who appreciated her for exactly who she was. And for the first time, she was beginning to believe that she could have everything she had dreamed of. Maybe even more. One warm afternoon, after finishing a long day of work, Clara sat on the porch, her legs stretched out and her fingers curled around a mug of freshly brewed tea. The sun was beginning to dip behind the hills, casting an orange glow over the land. The peacefulness of the moment settled over her like a blanket. Hank had gone into town to gather supplies, and Clara had the cabin to herself for a while. She enjoyed these quiet moments, where she could reflect on everything that had happened since she arrived. Life had slowly become simpler here. She had a routine now, something she had never expected to have when she first arrived at Hank's cabin. She was no longer just the woman who had been rejected by her husband-to-be, no longer just the small woman trying to fit into a world that didn't seem to have a place for her. Here she had a purpose. She worked hard every day, not just to survive, but to thrive. And Hank was always there, encouraging her and showing her that she was capable of more than she had ever imagined. But just as she was beginning to feel at peace, everything was about to change. That evening, as Clara finished cleaning up the kitchen, she heard the familiar sound of Hank's boots on the porch. But this time his footsteps were heavier, and his voice, when he spoke, was laced with something she couldn't quite place. "Clara?" Hank called, his tone a little sharper than usual. Clara turned to face him, wiping her hands on her apron. She could see from his expression that something was wrong. Hank, who had always been calm and collected, looked troubled, his brow furrowed as he stepped inside. Clara felt a knot form in her stomach. "What's happened?" she asked, trying to read his face. Hank paused for a moment before speaking, his voice low. "I ran into someone in town today, someone from your past." Clara froze. Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected anyone from her old life to come looking for her, especially not after everything that had happened. "Who?" she asked, dreading the answer. "It was Tom," Hank said, his voice heavy with meaning. Tom. The name hit Clara like a wave, crashing over her with a mix of emotions. Tom was the man she had come to marry. The man who had rejected her the moment he saw how small she was. The man who had made her feel insignificant. She had pushed him from her mind since she arrived here, but hearing his name again stirred up old feelings she thought she had buried. "What did he want?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Hank's expression darkened. "He wants you back. He says he made a mistake. He needs you to help him on his farm. He says he can't do it alone anymore." Clara's chest tightened. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Tom had rejected her without a second thought, claiming she wasn't strong enough for the life he wanted. Now, after everything she had been through, he expected her to return and help him? Clara felt a surge of anger rise within her. How could he think that after everything he had said to her? "I won't go back to him, Hank," Clara said, her voice steady but firm. "I'm not going back. Not after how he treated me." Hank nodded, clearly relieved by her words, but his eyes were still filled with concern. "I knew you wouldn't, Clara. But I thought you should know he's back in town and he's not leaving without you." Clara's mind raced. She couldn't understand what Tom was thinking. Had he truly changed, or was he just desperate? It didn't matter. Clara knew she had made the right choice in leaving him behind. She had found a place where she was respected, where she wasn't judged for her size. She wasn't going to let Tom ruin that. The next few days were tense. Clara spent most of her time working alongside Hank, trying to keep her mind occupied. But she couldn't shake the feeling that Tom was still out there, waiting for her to change her mind. She avoided going into town, not wanting to run into him, but it wasn't long before her worst fear came true. One morning, as she was tending to the garden, she heard the sound of hooves approaching. She froze, recognizing the rhythm of the horse's gallop. Clara turned to see a rider approaching the cabin. As he got closer, her heart sank. It was Tom, riding up with an air of confidence that only made Clara's stomach twist tighter. Tom dismounted and stood in front of her, looking her over with a mixture of confusion and frustration. "Clara, I know I was wrong," he said, his voice trying to sound sincere. "I made a mistake. I should have never turned you away. I need you. We could make a life together, just like I promised." Clara felt a rush of emotions, anger, hurt, but also something she couldn't quite place. A part of her wanted to scream at him, to tell him everything she had been through. But another part of her was tempted to listen. She had been so lonely, so unsure of herself when she had left him. What if this was her only chance at a life with someone who understood her? But the more she looked at Tom, the more she remembered how he had made her feel. He hadn't accepted her for who she was. He had expected her to change, to fit into his world, and when she didn't meet his expectations, he had cast her aside without a second thought. "No, Tom," Clara said firmly, her voice full of conviction. "I'm not going back. I found a place where I belong, and it's not with you. I've learned that I don't need to change for anyone. Not for you and not for anyone else." Tom's face twisted with frustration. "You're making a mistake," he said harshly. "You'll regret this. You'll never find a man who will treat you better than I did." Clara shook her head, her heart pounding in her chest. "I don't need someone to treat me better, Tom. I need someone who will respect me for who I am. I'm not going back to the life you promised me. I'm not going back to being someone I'm not. You can't control me anymore." Tom stood there for a moment, his face flushed with anger and disbelief, but Clara didn't back down. She knew that her decision was right. She had found strength in herself that she never thought possible, and she wasn't going to let anyone take that away from her. Without another word, Tom mounted his horse and rode off, leaving Clara standing in front of the cabin. Her heart was racing, but she felt a sense of relief wash over her. The weight that had been hanging over her for days had finally lifted. She had made the right choice, and she wasn't going to let anyone take her from the life she had built with Hank. Later that evening, Hank returned from town, and Clara told him what had happened. He listened quietly, his expression thoughtful. "I knew you were strong, Clara," Hank said quietly. "I'm proud of you for standing your ground." Clara smiled softly, feeling the warmth of his words. "I didn't know if I was strong enough, but now I do." The days after Tom left were peaceful, yet full of quiet reflection for Clara. She had spent so much of her life trying to fit into someone else's idea of who she should be, but now for the first time she felt free. She had made her decision, and though it hadn't been easy, she knew it had been the right one. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was living. Every morning she woke up to the sounds of the birds and the wind rustling through the trees. It was a simple life, but it was her life, and she felt more alive than she ever had before. Hank, too, seemed to settle more into this new version of life. There was a quiet understanding between him and Clara, something unspoken but deeply felt. He no longer looked at her as just a guest in his home. He saw her as his equal, his partner in this journey. They worked together side by side, each taking on their own responsibilities. There was a rhythm to their days now, a harmony that came from their mutual respect and understanding. The work at the cabin never stopped. There was always something that needed fixing or improving, whether it was tending to the garden, gathering firewood, or repairing the old fence. Yet the tasks no longer felt like burdens. They were part of the life Clara was building with Hank, and every accomplishment, no matter how small, felt like a victory. She could now walk through the cabin with pride, knowing that she had helped build it brick by brick from the ground up. It wasn't just a house, it was a symbol of her strength, her resilience, and the new life she had created for herself. One morning, as Clara worked in the garden, pulling weeds from the soil and planting new seeds, Hank came outside with a small bundle in his hands. He set it down on the table beside her and smiled. "I brought something for you," he said. Clara wiped her hands on her apron and looked up at him, surprised. "For me?" she asked, curious. Hank nodded. "I thought it might help you feel more at home here." Clara's heart fluttered as she unwrapped the bundle. Inside, she found a beautiful hand-carved wooden sign, its edges smoothed and polished. It was simple but elegant, with the word home engraved on it in neat letters. Tears filled Clara's eyes as she looked at the sign, and for a moment she was speechless. This simple gift, given with so much care, meant more to her than anything she could have imagined. It was a symbol of everything she had found in this place, everything she had built and grown into. She wasn't just a woman who had been rejected anymore. She was a woman who had found her way, her place, and her strength. "It's beautiful, Hank," she finally whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Hank smiled warmly. "I thought it might remind you that this is your home, Clara. You've made it that way." Clara looked at him, her heart full. "Thank you," she said, feeling a deep appreciation for this man who had helped her believe in herself again. Together, they nailed the sign above the door of the cabin, and as Clara stood back to admire it, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. This was her home. This was where she belonged. Over the next few weeks, Clara and Hank continued to build their life together. The work was never finished, but it didn't matter. Each day was another chance to grow, to learn, and to enjoy the simple joys that life had to offer. Hank was more than just her companion in work now. He was her friend, her partner, and someone she could truly trust. Their connection deepened with each passing day, and Clara began to realize that the quiet moments, the shared laughter, and the long talks by the fire were what mattered most. One evening, as they sat together after dinner, Clara looked out the window at the vast landscape stretching before them. The sun had just set, and the sky was painted with shades of pink, orange, and purple. It was a breathtaking view, one that Clara never tired of. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" she asked, her voice thoughtful. Hank was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I used to think about it a lot," he said slowly. "When I was out on the road, I always wondered if there was more to life than just moving from one place to the next. But now I think I've found it." Clara turned to look at him, her heart beating a little faster. "You've found it?" she asked, her voice soft. Hank nodded, meeting her gaze. "Yeah, I found that being here with you, working together, sharing this life, this is what I've been looking for." Clara's breath caught in her chest. She had always feared that her smallness, her size, would prevent her from ever finding true love or belonging. But here with Hank, she felt seen, valued, and understood. It wasn't just the work that made her feel at home. It was the way Hank had come to accept her for who she was, flaws and all, and in that moment Clara realized that Hank had become more than just a friend or a partner. He had become someone she truly cared about. She wasn't just building a life here with him, she was building a future. As the days went on, Clara and Hank's bond grew even stronger. They became a team, not just in the work they did, but in the way they faced life together. They supported each other through challenges, celebrated each other's victories, and shared in the quiet joy of simply being together. There was no more feeling of being small or insignificant. Clara had found her place, and Hank had found someone who could stand beside him, equally strong in her own way. It wasn't long before the town began to notice the change in Clara. She was no longer the quiet, unsure woman who had arrived with nothing. She had found her strength, and it showed in the way she carried herself. People who had once whispered about her now greeted her with smiles and respect. They saw the woman she had become, the woman who had built her life from the ground up, who had found her worth in a place where she had once felt lost. One afternoon, as Hank and Clara were walking into town together hand in hand, they passed a group of townspeople who smiled and waved. Clara smiled back, her heart light. She had become a part of this community, a part of something much bigger than herself. When they returned to the cabin that evening, Hank turned to Clara and said, "You've made this place a home. Clara, I don't know what I would have done without you. Clara's heart swelled. I think I've made it a home because of you. You helped me see that I could be more than I thought. Hank smiled, a deep warmth in his eyes. You were always more than you thought, Clara. You just needed to see it. And in that moment, Clara realized that she had truly found her place, her purpose, and her love. She wasn't just a mail-order bride who had been left behind. She was a woman who had built her own future, and in doing so had created a life full of love, strength, and possibility. The sun set that evening, casting a golden glow over the cabin. Clara and Hank stood side by side, looking out at the world they had created together. It was simple, it was hard work, but it was theirs, and that was enough. The future was wide open, and Clara knew that whatever came next, she would face it with the same strength and courage that had brought her here. Together, they would build a life full of endless possibilities, hand in hand as partners and as equals. And for the first time in her life, Clara felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be,